Well, hello, everyone. As I'm sure you know, I'm Lawrence Ruggiero, director of the Morse, and I'm here to welcome you to this second, and I hope the last, virtual reception. I hope you and yours have been spared the worst effects of this awful epidemic. Art is perhaps more important than ever in these terrible times, and at the Morse, we're doing all we can to do our part and keep art in your lives. On Tuesday, March 2nd, we're presenting two new installations, one of watercolors from Tiffany Studios, and another a new vignette filled with wonderful Chinese porcelain from the 18th and 19th centuries. The watercolors are colorful drawings by Tiffany designers Alice Gouvy and Lillian Palmier. Despite their purpose as preparatory stages in the development of finished work in enamel and ceramic, these drawings are themselves vibrant and fascinating works of art. Prompted by a recent purchase of a watercolor of a skunk cabbage by Gouvy, Jennifer Thalheimer, our curator and collection manager, has fashioned a really fine gallery experience. You will be enveloped and transported for at least a few minutes to a warm and comfortable world of nature and color. Incidentally, the new drawing was purchased with our own funds with help from Lillian Nassau Gallery, to which we're grateful. The porcelain vignette Jennifer has put together is an informal and we think charming way to see some portion of at least of a large gift of primarily, but not exclusively, blue and white Chinese porcelain. You can see the one behind me is not entirely blue and white. Avidly collected to this day by a large number of dedicated collectors, this porcelain is typical of the Oriental design, which became a very major influence on both art and design in the West in the 1870s, the 80s, and into the 20th century. Given by the Abinger family, the collection was formed by Dr. Benjamin Abinger, whose wife, Nancy Abinger, some of you might remember, we all remember her fondly from her association with the Morse when Hugh McCain was active, what is now quite a few years ago. We're grateful to the Abinger family for this generous gift, and I'm sure it will delight you. Now, if this virtual technology thing works, you'll hear in a few minutes words probably more informative than mine from Jennifer. But before I sign off, I want to add that despite the novelty and charm of virtual experience, there is no substitute for the real thing, and that is visiting these installations in real life. So I remind you that the Morse is, in fact, open and welcomes visitors Tuesday through Saturdays. It's been made as safe an environment as can be, and only a handful of visitors are admitted every 15 minutes, so we ask you to make an appointment. All you need to know is available at the website, morsemuseum.org. So enjoy the museum and stay tuned for Jennifer. Thanks so much.
It is definitely not the same opening galleries at the museum and not seeing everyone in person. I look forward to being in the galleries with you for future openings and discussing the installation and hearing your feedback. But alas, we are not there yet, so I'll introduce you virtually and hope that you will visit the museum to see the two new installations at your leisure. As you see here in Gallery 8, we have an exhibition of 18 of our collection of 21 design drawings made by designers at Louis Comfort Tiffany's enamel department around 1900 to 1902, including the recently acquired studies of skunk cabbage purchased by the museum with funds generously donated by Lillian Nassau LLC, which I will discuss in a bit. Louis Comfort Tiffany's enamel department was located 7 miles outside New York City in an idyllic workshop. Watercolor studies examining plant species in detail line the walls where between 1900 and 1902 designers Alice Carmen Gouvy and Lillian A. Palmier worked through their ideas for works to be transformed into shimmering enamels, richly glazed pottery, and crisp bronze work. Employees at Tiffany Studios' New York City workshop somewhat enviously referred to the Corona department as Little Arcadia, noting that they were able to freely pursue their creativity without the stresses of Tiffany's more commercially driven workshops in Manhattan. Louis Tiffany promoted women's talent in the decorative arts and publicly employed them. Most notable were the female employees referred to as the Tiffany girls. You can see in the center of this image in a photo where they're standing on the top of the Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company's building. They're referred to as the Tiffany girls, supervised by Clara Driscoll, head of the women's glass cutting department in Tiffany Studios' Manhattan office since the 1890s. While Driscoll's artists worked on large commissions like windows and mosaics early on, by 1900, an expansion of the overall company led to honing artists into specialized departments. Driscoll focused a team on making lamps and fancy goods, and a separate department focused on Louis Tiffany's latest passion projects in enamel, and then pottery opened on the grounds of Tiffany's furnaces, where the workers could both be close to the production facilities and far from the watch of the corporate money managers. This is an exhibition of watercolor studies, but it's straddled by galleries 7 and 9, which hold examples of enamels and also pottery. So you can switch between the galleries to either side and see examples of the material being produced from these studies and how very sculptural it was. The enamels that were produced from the watercolors were one-of-a-kind objects, as you can see here with the arrowroot vase on the right. And on the left is the pottery version, which was presumably cast from the original enamel piece. You can see that it was finished by hand, and then glaze would have been applied. And when it was fired, it would actually shrink, and so the size was usually smaller. The watercolor studies were both beautiful works of art signed by the artist and were also working documents with various ink and pencil markings found on the studies, which reveal the collaboration between the two. This study of skunk cabbage, new to our collection, is signed in 2 places by the artist Alice Gouvy. Educated in her hometown at the Cleveland School of Art, she moved to New York City in 1896 and studied at the Art Students League of New York City, then began her career with Tiffany until 1907 when she returned to Cleveland to teach. I have provided an example of a piece of pottery likely modeled on the study, not in our collection, along with an actual image of skunk cabbage. Shown here are 2 pieces associated with Alice Gouvy. On the left is an enamel work on display in Gallery 7, and on the right is a piece of pottery in Gallery 9, which is actually signed by Alice Gouvy on the base. This incredible head of cabbage is signed by our second artist, Lillian Palmier. She and her twin sister were born in Brooklyn, New York, and began working for Tiffany around 1897. Lillian's wedding announcement of April 1923 described her as, quote, successful enamel designer in an experimental laboratory at the Tiffany furnaces, end quote. On the upper left is a Tiffany pottery vase, not in our collection, that gives an idea of how the study may have helped to provide assistance not necessarily on the exact shape of the vase, but more specifically in the post-mold carving stages of production to add crisp details which would catch the glazes. On the lower left is an image of pottery produced in England in the 18th century, also not in our collection. You can see that the vegetal inspiration was not groundbreaking, but Palmier's department was experimenting with glazes, and likely the remarkable purple and green hues of the red cabbage reflected in her design would have proved effective in the boldly colored enamel work and pottery. We know that in some cases, the watercolor study served as the direct inspiration for relief decoration on the finished piece. In this case, a watercolor study of tulips, probably by Lillian Palmier, is copied directly, the sections framed in white, onto the bronze pottery bowl on the right. Sometimes only the forms are borrowed, like the shape of the crocus vase on the left from a study on the right of a dandelion. Notice the marking in pencil 124 pottery. There's still research to be done here. Vines were prominent in Tiffany's artwork and designs from the studio relate to many other works in the Morse's collection. The hexture panels include almost every variety: tomatoes, squash, and eggplants. And on the right, you can see the design drawing of tomatoes produced around 1900. On the upper left, you can see photographs of the actual squash vine with the watercolor on the right and the window from the Kemp House completed much earlier, around 1880. It's interesting to note that some plants remained a part of Tiffany's visual vocabulary for a very long time. Palmier's study of eggplants, again with a transom panel from an earlier Kemp commission, and on the lower left is an enamel eggplant not in our collection, and a pottery form from our collection on the upper right, which has been interpreted as either an eggplant or a tomato. But either way, it shows you the wonderful three-dimensional quality that many of these pieces in pottery and enamel got from these designs. This study of bittersweet may also be a source for October nightshade in the same family, which you can see a lampshade pattern on the upper left in our collection and an example of the berries in nature up below it. Palmier's study of horse chestnut branches reflects the popularity of the tree for the studios and Tiffany personally. The upper left is a pottery vase not in our collection with chestnut leaf relief decoration, and on the lower left there's an incredibly lush stenciling on the walls of Tiffany's living room at Laurelton Hall with this design. Furthering this motif, two enamel pieces on the left, and on the right, a pottery piece, all not in our collection, unfortunately, but we'd be happy to have them. Gooby's Magnolia study relates to the earlier window made in the 1880s for Tiffany's 72nd Street house and later moved to Laurelton Hall. It also relates to Agnes Northrup's study of the same tree. It's interesting to note that artists would oftentimes make several renderings of the same plant species. And on the left is an example from our collection, and on the right is an example from another collection. This unsigned, detailed study of cherry blossom reveals the detailed beauty of the enamel tray on the upper left and the center shallow vase, both in our collection. The covered dish on the lower left, not in our collection, I find interesting because it seems to structure the various studied components on the watercolor into a beautiful enamel whole. When seen next to the actual variety in nature, it's easy to appreciate the talents of the artist as Gooby has managed to capture the gray coating of the berries in her depiction of cedar berries. The second exhibition, which I will briefly mention, is a vignette containing a small sampling of the over 200 examples of Chinese, Canton, and Nanking export porcelain donated by John Benjamin and William Abinger, a collection amassed by their parents, Dr. Benjamin L. Abinger Jr. and Nancy Hardy Abinger, over the course of 40 years. These are beautiful examples of blue and white porcelain created largely for the Western world, depicting scenes and taking forms European, American, and even Japanese markets ate up. With some examples of colorful scenes, the entire collection spans between 1740 and 1890. Some may say a bit early for our collection, which usually includes works from roughly 1860 to 1920. Aside from the sheer beauty of the porcelain, the collection also represents an important aspect of interior design of the late 19th century, which featured and sometimes focused on Asian porcelain. Some examples of the interiors shown here are Whistler's Peacock Room and interiors from Tiffany's Bella apartment and his 72nd Street house. I will leave you with the image to the left as a teaser for the next Morse Museum Insider. You can see participants in the aesthetic movement obsessing on their blue and white porcelain vase, asking if they could ever live up to it. Thank you for watching our virtual opening, and please book your appointment at the Morse Museum to see these two new wonderful exhibitions. Thank you.